The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a broken prayer, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that makes even the living look half dead. I'd been staring at the departure board for 20 minutes, watching my connecting flight to Denver blink from delayed to canceled, with the cold finality of bad news delivered by text message. Flight 847 to Denver, canceled due to weather conditions. The announcement crackled through the terminal speakers, but I barely heard it over the exhaustion ringing in my ears. 3 days in Portland, 3 days of presentations that fell flat, handshakes that felt hollow, and the growing realization that I was drowning in a career I'd never really chosen. Just drifted into the way you drift into everything when you stop paying attention to your own life. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket, 12% battery, of course. The terminal was emptying out around me, conversations fading as travelers either found their ways to hotels or resigned themselves to sleeping on benches designed to discourage exactly that. I shouldered my carry-on and started walking, searching for an outlet, a corner, anything that might make the next 8 hours bearable until the first flight out in the morning. Gate 47 was at the end of the terminal, past the closed Hudson News and the darkened Starbucks. The kind of gate they put the flights to nowhere, where the carpet was a little more worn and the seats faced windows that looked out onto empty tarmac. Most of the travelers had congregated closer to the main hub, but here it was quiet, almost peaceful, if you could ignore the way the silence pressed against your chest. That's when I saw him. He was sitting 3 rows from the windows, cross-legged in one of those uncomfortable airport chairs like it was the most natural thing in the world. A book was open in his lap, something with a worn spine that suggested he'd actually read it before, not just bought it for the flight. His hair was dark and slightly messy, like he'd been running his fingers throughout it, and he wore a gray sweater that looked expensive but comfortable. The kind of person who somehow made airport fluorescence look like mood lighting. I found myself staring longer than I should have. There was something about the way he held himself, completely absorbed in his book, but not in a performative way, not like he was trying to look intellectual or unapproachable, just present, like he existed in his own pocket of calm while the rest of us were falling apart. He must have felt me watching because he looked up. Our eyes met across the empty rows of chairs, and I felt something shift in my chest. He didn't look away immediately the way people do when they catch a stranger staring. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, a small question mark of a gesture, and the corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't not a smile either. I looked away first, heat rising in my cheeks like I was 15 again. Get it together, I told myself, scanning the walls for an outlet. You're here for 8 hours. Don't make it weird. But when I glanced back, he was still looking at me, and this time he did smile. Just a little. Just enough. I found an outlet 2 rows away from him, close enough to be in the same general vicinity without looking like I was deliberately trying to sit near him. Because I wasn't. I was just looking for a place to charge my phone and maybe catch a few hours of sleep before my morning flight. At least that's what I told myself as I settled into the chair and plugged in my phone. Dead outlet, he said, and I looked up to find him watching me with an amused expression. Tried it earlier. The whole row's out. His voice was softer than I'd expected, the kind of voice that made you lean in without realizing it. Of course it is. I unplugged my phone and looked around helplessly. Any idea where the working ones are hiding? There's one over by the windows, he said, gesturing with his book. But someone's camping out there with approximately 17 devices plugged in. Looked like they were running a small electronics repair shop. I laughed despite myself. Great. Guess I'm going analog tonight. You could try the outlet by the men's room, he offered. Fair warning, though. It's right next to the hand dryer. Every 30 seconds, it sounds like a jet engine taking off. Tempting, but I think I'll pass. I settled back in my chair, accepting my fate. Phone will have to die with dignity. I've got a portable charger, he said, and before I could protest, he was reaching into his bag. It's got plenty of juice left. He stood up and walked over, holding out a sleek black power bank. Up close, I could see that his eyes were brown with these gold flecks that the fluorescent lights turned amber. He was taller than I'd thought, but he had this way of making himself smaller, less imposing. Like he was consciously trying not to take up too much space in the world. "I can't take your charger," I said, even as my fingers itched to grab it. "What if your phone dies?" "Then I'll read my book," he said simply. "Besides, misery loves company, but dead phones just love to stay dead." I took the charger, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. His skin was warm, and I found myself wondering what he'd been doing in Portland, where he was headed, why he seemed so calm about being stranded. "Thank you," I said. "Really, you probably just saved my sanity." "Don't mention it." He started to turn back to his seat, then paused. "I'm Marcus, by the way." "David," I said, and he nodded like he was filing it away somewhere important. He went back to his book, and I plugged in my phone, but I couldn't concentrate on the emails that immediately started flooding in. Work stuff. Urgent things that weren't really urgent, just designed to make me feel indispensable while simultaneously making me feel like I was drowning. I closed the email app and just watched Marcus read. There was something hypnotic about it. The way his eyes moved across the page, the occasional turn of his head when he shifted position. He read like someone who actually enjoyed it, not like someone trying to pass time or look sophisticated. "Good book?" I asked after a while because the silence was starting to feel loaded with possibilities I wasn't ready to examine. He looked up, blinking like he was coming back from somewhere far away. "It is, actually. Have you read any Murakami?" "I've tried," I admitted, "but I always feel like I'm missing something important. Like there's a layer of meaning I'm not smart enough to catch." "That's the point, I think," Marcus said, closing the book and setting it in his lap. "You're not supposed to catch everything. You're supposed to let it wash over you and see what sticks." He said it without any pretension, like he was talking about the weather instead of literature, like he genuinely wanted me to understand, not like he was trying to impress me with how well read he was. "What's this one about?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Loneliness, mostly," he said, then paused. "And connection, how we find each other in the strangest places." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. There was a sadness there, something soft and worn around the edges, like he'd been carrying it for a while. "Seems appropriate," I said, gesturing around the empty terminal. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It does." We fell into silence again, but it felt different now. Less awkward, more companionable. Like we were two people who'd found themselves in the same strange situation and decided to make the best of it. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate. "How was Portland? Flight delayed?" I started to type back, then stopped. How was Portland? Disappointing, frustrating, a waste of 3 days that made me question every choice I'd made in the last 5 years, but I couldn't exactly text that back. Flight canceled, stuck overnight, home tomorrow. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, finally. That sucks. At least you'll have some time to think. Time to think. That was exactly what I didn't want. "Bad news?" Marcus asked, and I realized I'd been frowning at my phone. "Just my roommate checking in," I said. "He thinks being stranded is some kind of opportunity for self-reflection." "And you disagree?" I considered this. I think sometimes the last thing you want is time alone with your thoughts. Marcus nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant. "What kind of thoughts are you trying to avoid?" It was a personal question, but he asked it so gently that it didn't feel invasive. More like he was offering to listen if I wanted to talk, but wouldn't push if I didn't. "Work stuff," I said, which was true, but not the whole truth. "Career stuff, life stuff. The usual existential crisis that comes with realizing you're almost 30 and you have no idea what you're doing." "What do you do for work?" "Marketing," I said, and the word tasted like chalk in my mouth. "Corporate consulting. I help companies figure out how to sell things people don't need to people who can't afford them." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's a refreshingly honest way to put it." Yeah, well, 3 days in Portland listening to myself give presentations about brand synergy and market penetration will do that to you. I rub my face with my hands. Sorry, I don't usually unload on strangers. We're not strangers, Marcus said simply. We're fellow refugees from the travel god's cruel sense of humor. I laughed, and he smiled at the sound. There was something about that smile that made my chest feel lighter. What about you? I asked. What brings you to the glamorous world of overnight airport camping? Wedding, he said, and something flickered across his face. My sister's, in Portland. That's nice, I said, then caught his expression. Or, not nice? It was beautiful, Marcus said carefully. She looked gorgeous. Her husband seems like a good guy. Everyone was very happy. But, he was quiet for a moment, picking at the corner of his book's cover. Have you ever been the only single person at a wedding? Like the only one? Ouch. 3 days of when are you going to find someone, and you just haven't met the right girl yet, and my personal favorite, you're so picky, Marcus. Maybe you should lower your standards. The way he said right girl made something click into place in my mind, but I didn't comment on it. Instead, I said, families are great at making you feel like your life choices are personal failures. Exactly. He looked at me with something like relief, like he'd been waiting for someone to understand. They mean well, but good intentions don't make the questions hurt less. No, they don't. We sat with that for a moment. Around us, the terminal had grown even quieter. A few travelers were stretched out across chairs trying to sleep. Others wandered the halls like ghosts looking for something. Food, comfort, a way out of this liminal space between destinations. I'm going to find some coffee, Marcus said suddenly. Want to come? I think there's a vending machine that might have something caffeinated and terrible. I looked at my phone, 11:47 p.m., then back at him. Lead the way. The vending machine was tucked away near the restrooms, humming softly in the dim light. Marcus fed it dollar bills while I studied the options. Coffee that promised to be bold and rich but would undoubtedly taste like burned water, hot chocolate that would be too sweet, tea that would be too weak. What's your poison? Marcus asked. Coffee, I guess. How bad can it be? He pressed the button and the machine whirred to life, dropping a paper cup and filling it with something that was technically coffee-colored. He handed it to me, then got one for himself. I took a sip and made a face. Oh, that's aggressively bad. Airport vending machine coffee, Marcus said solemnly. The great equalizer. Doesn't matter if you're flying first class or economy, we all suffer together. We walked back toward our gate, carrying our terrible coffee like a peace offering to the travel gods. The terminal felt even more surreal now, all harsh lights and empty spaces, like we were the last two people in the world. Can I ask you something? Marcus said as we settled back into our chairs. Sure. What were you doing before Portland? I mean, when you're not having existential crises about marketing? I thought about it. What had I been doing? Working mostly. Coming home to an empty apartment, ordering takeout, watching Netflix until I fell asleep on the couch. Living, I supposed, but barely. Honestly, going through the motions, I said. Work, sleep, repeat. You know that feeling where you're busy all the time but you can't remember what you actually accomplished? Yeah, Marcus said quietly. I know that feeling. What about you? What do you do when you're not avoiding wedding small talk? I'm a graphic designer, he said. Freelance, mostly. I work with small businesses, nonprofits, people who can't afford the big agencies but still want their stuff to look good. That sounds fulfilling. It can be, he said, when I actually have work. Freelancing is either feast or famine, and I've been in a bit of a famine lately. Is that why you're traveling economy with the rest of us peasants? He laughed. Among other reasons. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a granola bar. He unwrapped it, broke it in half, and offered me a piece. Didn't think I'd be sharing dinner in Gate 47 tonight, he said. I took the half he offered, our fingers brushing again. Thanks, though I'm not sure this qualifies as dinner. Airport food pyramid, Marcus said solemnly. Vending machine coffee, stale granola bars, and whatever optimism you can muster. We ate in comfortable silence, and I found myself stealing glances at him, the way he chewed thoughtfully, like he was actually tasting the granola bar instead of just consuming it. The way he held his coffee cup with both hands like he was trying to warm himself from the inside out. Small things, but they painted a picture of someone who paid attention to details, who found ways to be present even in the worst circumstances. Can I ask you something now? I said. Fair's fair. Why aren't you freaking out about being stuck here? Most people would be losing their minds right now. Marcus considered this, taking a sip of his terrible coffee. I guess I've gotten used to things not going according to plan, he said finally. Besides, there's something kind of peaceful about this, isn't it? Being nowhere, having nothing we're supposed to be doing, just existing in this weird bubble outside of normal time. I looked around the terminal with fresh eyes. He was right. There was something almost meditative about it. The usual urgency of travel had been stripped away, leaving just the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a floor buffer somewhere in the depths of the airport. I never thought about it that way, I said. My therapist would be proud, Marcus said with a self-deprecating smile. All those sessions on finding silver linings are finally paying off. You see a therapist? Yeah, he said, no shame in his voice. Started about a year ago. Best decision I ever made, honestly. I felt a flutter of something, respect maybe, or attraction to his openness. In my world, admitting you saw a therapist was like admitting weakness. But Marcus said it like it was just another fact about himself, like having brown eyes or preferring coffee to tea. What made you start? I asked. Combination of things, he said. Work stress, family stuff, relationship that ended badly. I was doing that thing where you convince yourself you're fine while everything falls apart around you. I know that thing. Yeah, I figured you might. We looked at each other across the space between our chairs, and I felt something shift, like we were stepping past small talk into something more honest, more dangerous. How long since the relationship ended? I asked, and then immediately felt intrusive. Sorry, you don't have to answer that. About 8 months, Marcus said. It was complicated. The way he said complicated suggested there were layers there he wasn't ready to share. I nodded, understanding the need for privacy around old wounds. What about you? He asked. Anyone waiting for you in Denver? Just my roommate, I said, and my cat, Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers? I didn't name him, I said defensively. I adopted him from a shelter. He came pre-named. What would you have called him? I thought about it. Something dignified, like Theodore or Winston. But now he's stuck being Mr. Whiskers forever. Pretty much, though he's grown into it, I think. He's got this very undignified way of falling off the couch when he's sleeping. Marcus laughed, and the sound made something warm unfurl in my chest. Cats are good company for existential crises. Yeah, they are. Very non-judgmental about your life choices. Unlike families at weddings. Unlike families anywhere. We fell into another comfortable silence. My phone showed 12:23 a.m. We'd been talking for over an hour, but it felt like minutes. Or maybe hours. Time worked differently in this liminal airport space, like Marcus had said. We were existing in a bubble outside of normal time, and I found myself hoping it wouldn't burst. You know what's weird? I said. I was dreading this flight delay. 8 hours stuck in an airport sounded like torture. And now? I looked at him, really looked at him. The way the harsh lights caught the gold in his eyes, the way he held himself like he was listening not just to my words, but to the spaces between them. The way he'd shared his charger and his granola bar and his honesty like gifts given freely, without expectation of return. Now it doesn't seem so bad, I said. Something passed between us then, a moment of recognition, of possibility, like we were both acknowledging that whatever this was, it was something more than just two strangers killing time. Marcus's phone buzzed and he glanced at it. My sister, he said, checking to make sure I made it home safely. Are you going to tell her you're stuck at the airport? Eventually, she'll worry if I don't. He typed back quickly, then set the phone aside. She's good at worrying. Comes with being the older sister. How much older? 3 years. Might as well be 30, the way she acts sometimes. Very protective. That's sweet. It is. Marcus agreed. Also exhausting. She's been trying to set me up with people since high school. Any luck? Marcus gave me a look that was hard to read. Not the kind she's hoping for. There it was again. That careful phrasing that suggested more than it said. I wanted to ask, to push for clarity, but something held me back. We were still in that delicate stage of getting to know each other where one wrong question could shatter the spell. Instead, I said, families mean well, but they don't always understand what we actually need. No, they don't. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then looked at me with something like surprise. You're easy to talk to, you know that? So are you. It was true. I couldn't remember the last time I'd talked to someone, really talked, without feeling like I had to perform or impress or maintain some kind of facade. With Marcus, conversation felt effortless, like we were speaking the same language even when we weren't saying everything we meant. What's your family like? Marcus asked. Small, just my mom and dad, and they're both pretty hands-off. They figured out a long time ago that I need space to figure things out on my own. That sounds nice, actually. It is. Sometimes I wonder if they're too hands-off, you know? Like maybe they gave up trying to understand me instead of just giving me space. What would you want them to understand? It was a good question. What did I want my parents to understand? That I was lonely? That I was lost? That I spent most of my time feeling like I was going through the motions of a life that didn't quite fit? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe that's the problem. Marcus nodded like that made perfect sense. Sometimes I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to have it all figured out. Like everyone else got some manual for how to be an adult, and we missed the distribution. Yes, I said, probably more emphatically than necessary. Exactly that. My therapist says that's normal, the feeling like everyone else knows something you don't. What else does your therapist say? That most of the time everyone else is just as confused as you are. They're just better at hiding it. I looked around the terminal at the other stranded travelers. A woman in a business suit was asleep across 3 chairs, her blazer draped over her like a blanket. A college-age kid was hunched over his laptop, probably playing games to pass the time. An elderly couple was sharing earbuds, watching something on a tablet. Were they all just as confused as I was? Just as unsure about their choices, their relationships, their futures? It was oddly comforting to think so. Your therapist sounds smart, I said. She is. Very patient with my tendency to overthink everything. Is that a problem you have? Marcus laughed. You should see my browser history. I once spent 4 hours researching the best way to reheat pizza. And what did you conclude? That there is no best way. Pizza is meant to be eaten fresh, and everything else is just compromise. That's very philosophical. I contain multitudes, Marcus said with mock seriousness. I groaned. Did you just quote Whitman at me? Maybe. In an airport at 12:30 in the morning? The best time for poetry, really. When else are you going to contemplate containing multitudes? I was grinning now, probably wider than the joke deserved, but I couldn't help it. There was something about Marcus's sense of humor, dry but warm, clever but not mean, that made me want to keep talking to him all night, which I realized was exactly what we were going to do. Can I confess something? I said. Sure. I'm actually kind of glad my flight got canceled. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Yeah, I mean, not glad. I don't want to be stuck here forever, but I searched for the right words. It's been a while since I had a conversation that didn't feel like work. What do you mean? I don't know. Small talk with coworkers, catching up with friends who are too busy to really catch up, family check-ins that are more obligation than connection. Everything feels so transactional, like we're all just going through the motions. Marcus was nodding, like everyone's reading from the same script. Exactly. But this, I gestured between us, this feels real. It does, Marcus said quietly. We looked at each other across the space between our chairs, and I felt that flutter in my chest again. Stronger this time, more insistent, like something was waking up that had been asleep for a long time. Are you hungry? Marcus asked suddenly. Actually hungry, I mean. Not granola bar hungry. I considered this. I could eat. I saw a 24-hour place upstairs. Nothing fancy, but better than vending machine cuisine. Lead the way. We gathered our things and headed for the escalators. The upper level of the terminal was even quieter than where we'd been camping out, with most of the shops and restaurants closed behind metal grates. But at the far end, past the deserted bookstore and the locked jewelry kiosks, there was a small cafe with its lights still on. The place was called Sky High Diner, and it looked exactly like what you'd expect from airport food at 1 a.m. Fluorescent lighting, worn vinyl booths, and a menu that promised everything and delivered mediocrity. But it was open, and it smelled like coffee and French fries, which was good enough for us. A tired-looking waitress with kind eyes seated us in a booth by the windows. Outside, the tarmac was empty except for a few lonely planes parked at distant gates, their lights blinking steadily in the darkness. This is surreal, I said, sliding into the booth across from Marcus. Good surreal or bad surreal? I looked around the empty diner, then back at him. He'd taken off his sweater and was wearing a simple white t-shirt underneath. Without the extra layer, I could see the outline of his collarbones, the way his shoulders curved. He looked younger somehow, less guarded. Good surreal, I said. The waitress brought us menus and coffee that was infinitely better than the vending machine variety. We ordered without much thought, grilled cheese and fries for me, a burger for Marcus, and settled in to wait. So, Marcus said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. Tell me something true. Something true? Yeah, something real. Not small talk, not what you'd tell someone you just met, something true. I thought about it. What was true? What was real about my life right now? I'm scared, I said finally. Of what? That I'm wasting my life, that I'm 28 years old and I don't know what I want, and by the time I figure it out, it'll be too late. Marcus nodded slowly. What would too late look like? I don't know. Maybe that's part of the problem. I can't even visualize what I'm afraid of missing. So you're afraid of missing something you can't identify. When you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous. It doesn't sound ridiculous, Marcus said gently. It sounds human. The waitress brought our food and we ate in comfortable silence for a while. The grilled cheese was better than I'd expected. Crispy on the outside, gooey on the inside. The kind of simple comfort food that hits differently at 1 a.m. in an empty airport diner. Your turn, I said around a bite of sandwich. My turn for what? Something true. Marcus considered this, twirling a French fry between his fingers. I'm afraid I'm never going to fall in love again. The words hung in the air between us, honest and vulnerable, and a little heartbreaking. Again? I asked gently. I was in love once, he said. Really in love. The kind where you can't imagine being with anyone else, where you start planning a future together without even discussing it. What happened? He couldn't handle being out, Marcus said simply. And I couldn't handle being a secret anymore. He. The pronoun settled into place like a puzzle piece I'd been waiting for without realizing it. Everything clicked. The careful phrasing about his sister's matchmaking attempts, the wedding questions about finding the right girl, the way he talked about his complicated relationship. How long were you together? I asked. 3 years. We lived together for 2 of them. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. I thought we were building something real, you know? But he kept saying he needed more time, that it was complicated, that his family wouldn't understand. And I kept believing him because I wanted to believe him. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. The worst part wasn't even the breakup. It was realizing that I'd been living in a fantasy, that while I was imagining our future together, he was still trying to figure out how to hide me from his. I reached across the table without thinking and touched his hand. His skin was warm and he didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," I said. "Thanks." He looked down at our hands, then back up at me. "It's been 8 months and I still feel like I'm carrying this weight around. Like I used up all my capacity for love on someone who couldn't love me back the way I needed." There was something in the way he said it, raw and honest and a little desperate, that made my chest ache. I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that he hadn't used up anything, that love wasn't a finite resource, but I also understood the fear. I'd felt it myself in different ways, the worry that you might miss your chance or waste your shot or simply run out of opportunities for connection. "Can I tell you something?" I said. "Sure. I don't think love works that way. I think it's more like, I don't know, like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets." Marcus smiled, but it was a sad smile. "That's a nice thought. You don't believe me. I want to believe you, but right now it feels like I'm walking around with this broken thing inside my chest and I don't know how to fix it." I understood that feeling too. Maybe not the specific heartbreak of a closeted relationship, but the general sense of something essential being damaged, out of reach. "Maybe you don't need to fix it," I said. "Maybe you just need to give it time to heal." How much time? It was an impossible question, but I could hear the real question underneath it. Will I ever feel normal again? Will I ever be able to trust someone with my heart? Will I ever stop feeling broken? "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think you're stronger than you realize." "What makes you say that?" I thought about it. What had I seen in Marcus over the past few hours that made me believe in his resilience? "The way you talk about your ex," I said finally. "You're hurt, but you're not bitter. You understand why he made the choices he made, even though they hurt you. That takes strength." "Or stupidity." "No, not stupidity. Compassion. For him and for yourself." Marcus was quiet for a moment, absently tracing patterns on the table with his finger. "My therapist says something similar, that healing isn't about forgetting or getting over it. It's about integrating the experience into who you are." Smart therapist. "Yeah, she is." He looked up at me with something like surprise. "I can't believe I'm telling you all this. I don't usually, I'm not someone who opens up to strangers." "We've established that we're not strangers," I reminded him. "We're fellow refugees, remember?" "Right, fellow refugees." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "What about you? Have you ever been in love?" It was my turn to consider the question. Had I been in love? I'd had relationships, certainly. I'd dated people I cared about, people I enjoyed spending time with. But love, the kind Marcus was talking about, the kind that reorganizes your entire understanding of yourself and your future, I wasn't sure. "I don't think so," I said finally. I've cared about people. I've had relationships that mattered. But I don't think I've ever felt that thing you described, where you can't imagine being with anyone else." "What do you think that means?" "Honestly, I think it means I've been sleepwalking through my romantic life the same way I've been sleepwalking through everything else." "What would it look like to wake up?" Another impossible question, but I found myself actually considering it. What would it look like to wake up, to pay attention, to stop going through the motions and start actually living? "I don't know," I said. "Maybe like this." "Like this?" "Like sitting in an airport diner at 1 a.m. having the most honest conversation I've had in years with someone I met 3 hours ago." Marcus looked at me across the table and something shifted in his expression, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time, or maybe like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. "You know what's funny?" he said. "What?" "I was dreading going home, back to my empty apartment, back to freelance work that barely pays the bills, back to well-meaning friends who keep trying to set me up with people because they can't stand to see me alone. And now? Now I'm sitting in the worst diner in America with someone who gets it, and I don't want this night to end." The words hung between us, loaded with possibility and longing and something that felt dangerously close to hope. I could feel my heart beating faster, could feel that flutter in my chest expanding into something bigger, more urgent. Marcus, I started, then stopped. What was I going to say? That I felt it too? That this strange, suspended night was starting to feel like the most real thing that had happened to me in months? That looking at him across this cracked vinyl booth was making me understand what people meant when they talked about sparks and electricity and all those cliches I'd never quite believed in. What? He prompted gently. Nothing. I just. I shook my head. This is crazy. What's crazy? This, us. The way I feel like I've known you for years instead of hours. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. It is crazy. But he didn't sound like he thought it was a bad kind of crazy. He sounded like he felt it too. That sense of recognition, of falling into step with someone you'd been unconsciously looking for your entire life. Part 2. We'd been lying on opposite ends of the airport bench for 20 minutes, neither of us able to sleep. The thin airline blankets we'd managed to scavenge from a sympathetic gate agent barely covered our legs, and the armrests dug into our ribs, but neither of us complained. Outside, the darkness was starting to soften around the edges, that particular pre-dawn gray that makes everything look like a half-remembered dream. The terminal had settled into its deepest quiet. Even the floor buffers had stopped their distant humming. Just the occasional ping of an elevator or the whisper of air through the ventilation system. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world. If we weren't stuck here, Marcus whispered suddenly, his voice barely audible in the stillness, would you still be talking to me like this? I turned my head toward him in the dim light. He was lying on his side, facing me, his blanket pulled up to his chin. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but there was something vulnerable in the way he held himself, like he was bracing for an answer he didn't want to hear. The question hung between us in the quiet. Would I? Would I have noticed him in a crowded coffee shop on a busy street, in the normal world where people moved with purpose and destination? Would I have had the courage to approach him, to start a conversation, to let myself be this open with a stranger? I didn't know. But I knew the answer he needed to hear, and more importantly, I knew it was true. I don't know, I said quietly, but I don't want this to stop. Something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or recognition, like I'd given him permission to feel something he'd been trying to suppress. I keep thinking the sun's going to come up and this will all feel like a dream, he said. What if it doesn't have to? What if it does? It was a fair question. In a few hours, we'd board our separate flights and return to our separate lives. He'd go back to his freelance design work and his therapy sessions and his well-meaning sister. I'd go back to my marketing job and my existential crises and my cat named Mr. Whiskers. The magic of this suspended night would fade into memory, the way all extraordinary moments eventually do. But maybe that was okay. Maybe some things were meant to be brief and perfect, like shooting stars or first snow or the way Marcus looked at me in the fluorescent light of Gate 47. Then at least we'll have had tonight, I said. Marcus smiled, and even in the dim light I could see the way it transformed his face. Yeah, at least we'll have had tonight. We fell into silence again, but it felt different now, less heavy, more peaceful. Like we'd acknowledged something important and could rest in the knowing of it. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but I was hyper-aware of Marcus just a few feet away, the sound of his breathing, slow and steady, the way he shifted occasionally, trying to find a comfortable position on the unforgiving bench, the warmth radiating from his body in the cool terminal air. At some point, I'm not sure when, I felt his fingers brush against mine. It was barely a touch, just the lightest contact between his knuckles and the back of my hand where it dangled over the edge of the bench, but it sent electricity up my arm and straight to my chest, making my breath catch. I waited for him to pull away, for the moment to pass, for us to pretend it hadn't happened. But he didn't. His fingers stayed where they were, barely touching mine, and I found myself shifting slightly to make the contact more deliberate. We lay like that for a long time, not quite holding hands, but connected. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental, like we were anchoring each other in this strange liminal space, keeping each other from drifting away into sleep or uncertainty or the fear of morning. I've never told anyone half the things I told you tonight, Marcus whispered after a while. I opened my eyes and found him looking at me again. His face was soft in the dim light, unguarded in a way that made my heart ache. Maybe it's easier when you think you'll never see them again, I said. Is that what you think? That we'll never see each other again? The question caught me off guard. I'd been operating under that assumption, that this was a beautiful, temporary thing, a one-night connection that would exist only in the amber of memory. But the way he asked it, with that quiet hope in his voice, made me reconsider. I don't know, I said honestly. Do you want to see me again? Yes, he said so quickly that it surprised us both. I mean, yes, I'd like that. Something warm unfurled in my chest. Even in the real world, without the airport magic? Especially in the real world. I turned onto my side to face him properly, our fingers still barely touching. In the gray pre-dawn light, he looked younger, more vulnerable, like someone who'd taken off a mask he'd been wearing so long he'd forgotten it was there. What are you afraid of? I asked softly. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. That you'll realize I'm not as interesting as I seem right now, that without the drama of being stranded together, I'm just ordinary. Marcus, I know it's stupid, but you think I'm going to wake up tomorrow and decide that the most honest, thoughtful, funny person I've met in years was just a figment of airport-induced delirium? He laughed softly, but there was still uncertainty in his eyes. When you put it like that. Besides, I said, shifting slightly so our faces were closer together, I happen to like ordinary. Extraordinary is exhausting. Ordinary is underrated. You say that now. I say that because it's true. Do you know what I found most attractive about you tonight? Not the book or the way you handled the flight cancellation or even how generous you were with your charger. It was the way you broke that granola bar exactly in half before offering it to me, like it was the most natural thing in the world to share what you had with a stranger. Marcus's breath hitched slightly. That's a pretty small thing to base attraction on. The small things are everything, I said. They're what tell you who someone really is. We were close enough now that I could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could count the individual lashes that cast shadows on his cheeks. Close enough that if I moved just a little bit forward, but I didn't. This moment felt too fragile, too precious to rush. Instead, I let my fingers curl slightly around his, the barest suggestion of holding hands. What are you afraid of? Marcus asked, echoing my earlier question. I thought about it. What was I afraid of? That he'd disappear back into his life and I'd be left with just the memory of this night? That I'd built up something in my mind that couldn't survive the harsh light of day? That I was feeling things too quickly, too intensely for someone I'd known for less than 8 hours? That this feeling isn't real, I said finally. That it's just, I don't know, emotional dehydration or something. Like being in the desert and thinking a mirage is water. How would we know the difference? I guess we wouldn't, not tonight. But maybe tomorrow, next week? Maybe. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing barely perceptible circles against my knuckles. I want to find out, he said quietly, even if it scares me. Yeah? Yeah. I don't want to wonder for the rest of my life what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to try. I felt something shift inside me, like a door I'd been keeping locked suddenly swinging open. I want to find out too. We lay there looking at each other in the gray light, our hands barely touching, the terminal humming quietly around us. I could feel my heart beating against my ribs, could see my own anticipation reflected in Marcus's eyes. I didn't know what we were doing or where it would lead. I didn't know if the connection we'd found in this strange suspended night would survive the return to real life. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wanted to find out. I wanted to be brave enough to see what might grow from this tender beginning. We should try to sleep, Marcus said eventually. though he made no move to turn away or break the fragile contact between our hands. Probably. Gate agents will start showing up in a few hours. Mm-hmm. But neither of us moved. We just lay there in the quiet, connected by the lightest possible touch, afraid that sleep might break whatever spell had settled over us. At some point, exhaustion finally won. I drifted into a light doze, still hyper-aware of Marcus's presence beside me, still anchored by the warmth of his fingers against mine. I dreamed of airports and coffee shops and conversations that lasted until dawn, of someone with gold-flecked eyes who looked at me like I was worth seeing. I woke to the sound of wheels on linoleum, a custodial cart being pushed past our makeshift campsite. The terminal was still dim, but there was a different quality to the darkness now. The deep night quiet was starting to give way to the subtle stirrings of early morning. Marcus was awake too, I realized. His breathing had changed, become more conscious, more alert. Our hands were still touching, his fingers curled loosely around mine like we'd maintained the connection even in sleep. "What time is it?" he whispered. I lifted my head to check the departure board. 4:17. Couple more hours. Yeah. We didn't talk about what would happen in a couple more hours. We didn't talk about flights or destinations or the return to ordinary life. We just lay there in the pre-dawn quiet, holding on to each other in the smallest possible way, trying to make the night last a little longer. The custodial cart stopped nearby, and I could hear the soft sounds of someone emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces. A flashlight beam swept across our area, and we both froze instinctively, like children caught out of bed after lights out. The beam lingered for a moment, long enough for me to see Marcus clearly in the harsh white light, his hair mussed from the pillow he'd made of his jacket, his eyes wide and slightly startled. Then it moved on, and we were left in shadows again. "Think we're breaking some kind of rule," Marcus whispered, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Definitely. Probably several." "Good. I've always wanted to be a rebel." I laughed softly. "This is your idea of rebellion, holding hands with a stranger on an airport bench? You'd be surprised how rebellious that feels to me." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his thumb still tracing those barely perceptible circles against my hand. "I told you about my ex, about how he couldn't handle being out." "Yeah. What I didn't tell you is how much of that got into my head. 3 years of being someone's secret, of pretending we were just friends, of watching him panic every time we showed any kind of affection in public. It does things to you." I felt a pang of something. Sympathy, anger, protectiveness. "What kind of things?" "Makes you second-guess everything. Makes you wonder if maybe you're asking for too much, wanting too much. Makes you think that maybe love is supposed to be hidden, shameful, something you only do behind closed doors." His words hung in the air between us, honest and raw and heartbreaking. I could picture it. 3 years of stolen moments and careful distances, of love measured out in careful doses so as not to overwhelm or frighten. No wonder he'd been afraid that his capacity for love had been used up. It hadn't been used up. It had been systematically starved. "That sounds incredibly lonely," I said softly. It was, and the thing is, even now, even knowing that it wasn't healthy, part of me still feels like I'm doing something wrong. Like maybe I shouldn't be lying here holding your hand where someone might see us. I looked around the empty terminal. The custodial worker had moved on, the gates were dark and deserted. We were alone except for a few other stranded travelers sleeping in distant corners. But I understood what he meant. The fear wasn't rational, it was learned, embedded, the kind of thing that lingers long after the circumstances that created it have changed. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I mean, with this? With us being whatever this is?" Marcus squeezed my fingers gently. "I'm terrified," he said. "But in a good way, like maybe I'm finally doing something right." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just squeezed back, trying to communicate through touch what I couldn't find words for. That he was safe, that this was good, that whatever we were building in this strange suspended night was worth the fear. "Can I tell you something?" I said after a while. "Always. I didn't know how a stranger could make me feel more known than people I've known for years. Marcus turned his head to look at me, and even in the dim light I could see the surprise in his expression. Really? Really? I keep thinking about what you said earlier about how everyone else got some manual for being an adult and we missed the distribution. I've felt that way my entire life. Like I was always slightly out of step, always missing some crucial piece of information that everyone else just knew. And now? Now I feel like maybe I wasn't missing anything. Maybe I just hadn't found the right person to be out of step with. Marcus's breath caught slightly, and for a moment I wondered if I'd said too much, revealed too much too quickly. But then he smiled, that soft, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and I knew it was okay. I like being out of step with you, he said quietly. Yeah? Yeah, it feels like dancing. We lay there in the growing light, our fingers intertwined now, no longer pretending this was accidental contact. Outside, the first planes of the morning were being moved into position, their lights blinking steadily against the pale sky. Soon the terminal would come alive with gate agents and coffee carts and the urgent energy of people with places to be. But not yet. For now, we existed in this pocket of stillness, this bubble outside of time and expectation and the ordinary rules of how strangers were supposed to behave. I must have dozed again because the next thing I knew, Marcus was gently shaking my shoulder. The terminal was brighter now, filled with the gray light of early morning. I could hear voices in the distance, the first stirrings of airport staff arriving for their shifts. "David," Marcus said softly, "I think they're starting to update the departure boards." I sat up, blinking away sleep, and looked toward the monitors. Sure enough, several flights that had been listed as canceled were now showing boarding or on time. The weather system had passed, and the airport was coming back to life. "What time is it?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. 6:30. We'd been lying there for hours, existing in our own private world while the rest of the terminal slept. Now reality was creeping back in, demanding attention, insisting that this night would have to end. I looked at Marcus, his hair still mussed from sleep, his eyes soft and a little sad as he watched me process what this meant. In the growing light, he looked even more beautiful than he had in the fluorescent glow of midnight. Beautiful and real, and like someone I very much didn't want to say goodbye to. "Should we check our flights?" he asked, though he sounded as reluctant as I felt. "Probably." But neither of us moved to check our phones. We just sat there on the airport bench, the thin airline blankets pooled around our waists, our hands still loosely connected, trying to hold on to the last moments of this strange, perfect night. "Marcus," I started, then stopped. What was I going to say? That I didn't want this to end? That 8 hours with him had felt more real than months of my ordinary life? That I was falling for someone I'd known for less than a day and it terrified and thrilled me in equal measure? "I know," he said softly, saving me from having to find the words. "I feel it too." We were interrupted by an announcement crackling over the terminal speakers. "Attention passengers, the airport will begin normal operations at 7 a.m. Please check with your gate agents for updated flight information." Normal operations. The phrase felt like a cold splash of water, a reminder that our bubble was about to burst whether we were ready or not. Marcus pulled out his phone and checked his boarding pass. "Gate 23, he said, United to San Francisco." I checked mine. "Gate 12, Southwest to Denver." Different airlines, different gates, different cities. The logistics of the morning were already beginning to pull us apart. "How long do we have?" I asked. Marcus scrolled through his phone. "My flight's supposed to board at 8:15. Yours?" 8:30. An hour and a half. It felt like no time at all and an eternity simultaneously. We gathered our things slowly, reluctantly. I folded the airline blanket we'd shared and set it on the bench, wondering if someone else would use it tonight, if other stranded travelers would find comfort in its thin warmth. Marcus shouldered his bag and picked up his book, the Murakami novel that had started our conversation hours ago. "Keep me company while I find some real coffee?" he asked, and I could hear the reluctance to separate in his voice. "Of course." We walked through the terminal together, past the shops that were beginning to open, past the gate agents setting up their podiums, past the other overnight refugees who were gathering their belongings and checking their phones. The airport was transforming around us, shifting from the quiet liminal space it had been in the dark hours to the busy hub of activity it was designed to be. We found a Starbucks that was just opening, the baristas moving efficiently through their opening routine. Marcus ordered for both of us, coffee for him, tea for me because he'd remembered that I'd mentioned preferring tea to coffee, a small detail that made my heart flutter. We sat at a small table by the windows, watching planes taxi past in the early morning light. The sun was fully up now, painting everything in shades of gold and amber that seemed impossibly beautiful after the harsh fluorescent night we'd shared. "This is surreal," I said, echoing what I'd said in the diner hours earlier. Different kind of surreal, though. "Yeah, less suspended, more real, more ending." Marcus nodded, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he was trying to warm himself from the inside out. I keep wanting to slow time down. "If you figure out how, let me know." We drank our coffee and watched the morning unfold around us. Gate agents made announcements, passengers hurried past with their rolling suitcases. The familiar energy of an airport in full swing surrounded us. But we remained in our own bubble, reluctant to fully rejoin the world of schedules and destinations. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said after a while. "Always. What happens now?" It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one I didn't know how to answer. What did happen now? We'd exchange numbers, maybe, and text for a while. But he lived in San Francisco and I lived in Denver. We'd both return to our regular lives, our jobs, our routines. Would this night become just a story we told at parties? A sweet memory that grew more golden and less real with each passing year? "I don't know," I said honestly. "What do you want to happen?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup like it might hold answers. "I want to see you again," he said finally. "Not just as a nice memory or a story about the night I got stranded at the airport. I want to actually try this, whatever this is. Even though I live in Denver and you live in San Francisco. Especially because of that. Do you know how easy it would be to make excuses if we lived in the same city? To say we'll get together soon and then let soon turn into someday and someday turn into never? At least this way, if we make the effort, it means something." I looked at him across the small table, his face earnest and hopeful and a little scared. He was right. Distance would make it harder, but it would also make it intentional. If we chose to stay in touch, to visit each other, to build something from this unlikely beginning, it would be because we both actively wanted it, not because it was convenient. "I want to try too," I said. "It scares me, but I want to try." Marcus smiled, and it was like watching the sun come up. "Yeah? Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, and I have no idea how to make a relationship work across 2 time zones, but," I shrugged, "I don't want to wonder what if." "Me neither." We sat there grinning at each other like idiots, probably looking to anyone watching like two people who'd had too much coffee and not enough sleep. But I didn't care. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt hopeful about something. Not just generally hopeful, but specifically, concretely hopeful about this man sitting across from me and the possibility of building something real with him. "We should probably head to our gates," Marcus said eventually, though he made no move to get up. "Probably. They'll start boarding soon." "Yeah." But we stayed where we were, reluctant to break the spell, to admit that this perfect strange night was really ending. Around us, the airport continued its morning rhythm, but we remained frozen in our own pocket of time. Finally, Marcus stood up, shouldering his bag. "Walk me to my gate?" "Of course." Gate 23 was back toward the main terminal, past the shops that were now fully open and bustling with early travelers. We walked slowly, deliberately, like we were trying to stretch every step. "I never asked what you do in San Francisco," I said as we walked. "Besides graphic design, I volunteer at an LGBTQ youth center, help kids with college applications mostly, but sometimes just being someone who's a few years older and made it through." Of course he did. Of course, Marcus spent his free time helping lost kids find their way. It was just one more thing that made him seem almost too good to be real. That sounds amazing. It is terrifying sometimes, but amazing. These kids are so brave, so much braver than I was at their age. What do you tell them when they're scared about coming out or figuring out who they are? Marcus thought about it as we walked. That there's no timeline for becoming yourself, that it's okay to take it slow, to change your mind, to not have all the answers. That being different isn't the same as being wrong. Sounds like good advice for anyone. Yeah, I guess it is. We reached Gate 23 where a small crowd was already gathering. Marcus's flight was still showing on time, boarding in 20 minutes. My stomach clenched at the sight of the departure board, the reality of separation hitting me like a physical thing. This is me, Marcus said unnecessarily. Yeah. We stood there awkwardly, neither of us sure what the protocol was for saying goodbye to someone you'd spent 8 hours falling for in an airport. A handshake seemed ridiculous. A hug felt both too much and not nearly enough. I should give you my number, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. Right, good idea. We exchanged phones and entered our contact information. I typed David Airport into his phone, then changed it to just David. This wasn't just about the airport anymore. When I handed his phone back, our fingers brushed, and I felt that same jolt of electricity I'd felt every time we'd touched throughout the night. Some things apparently didn't fade with the sunrise. I should probably head to my gate too, I said, though every cell in my body was screaming at me to stay. Gate 12, right? Yeah. I'll text you, Marcus said, when I land, if that's okay. I'd like that. We stood there for another moment, the crowd of passengers growing around us, the morning energy of the airport pulling us back into the world of schedules and obligations. I could see the gate agent setting up her podium, preparing for the boarding announcement. Marcus, I started, then stopped. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many words that felt too big or too small or too soon. That this had been the best night I'd had in years. That he'd reminded me what it felt like to actually connect with another human being. That I was terrified of losing this feeling, this sense of possibility and hope and rightness that I'd found in the most unlikely place. Instead, I just said, thank you for tonight, for all of it. Thank you too, he said softly, for seeing me, for listening, for making me remember that not all love stories end badly. The gate agent picked up her microphone and we both knew we were out of time. I should go, I said, taking a step backward. Yeah, me too. But as I turned to leave, Marcus reached out and lightly touched my wrist, his fingers warm against my skin. David, he said, and when I turned back, his eyes were bright and determined and a little desperate. I don't want this to be just one night. The words hung in the air between us, brave and vulnerable and full of possibility. I looked at his face, open and hopeful and scared, and felt something settle into place in my chest, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. It won't be, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. This is just the beginning. Marcus smiled then, that beautiful, transformative smile I'd been falling for all night, and I knew that whatever happened next, however complicated the logistics, however uncertain the future, we were going to try. We were going to be brave enough to see what could grow from this tender beginning. The boarding announcement crackled over the speakers, and the crowd began to stir, but for just one more moment we stood there connected by his touch on my wrist, by the promise we just made to each other, by the strange, perfect magic of a night that had changed everything. Then he let go, and I walked away, and our separate flights carried us back to our separate lives. But the connection remained, invisible and unbreakable, stretching across time zones and distance, and all the ordinary obstacles that stand between two people who found something extraordinary. As my plane lifted off from the tarmac, I pressed my face to the window and watched the airport grow smaller below us. Somewhere in that maze of gates and terminals, Marcus was probably doing the same thing, watching the place where we'd found each other disappear into the morning haze. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the first page of a story I couldn't wait to write. E.